Alright, so these are the first 4 chapters. It's chapter 1, 2, 6, and 7. So when you go back to study, those will be what you want to cover. Chapter 1 is really trying to get you to understand what environmental science is and how we interact with the environment. That is what the topic of the whole course is. Also getting some background knowledge on ecosystem services. That's a big term that we're going to talk about. And then what actually sustainability, what that means. So there's the earth. Whee! The environment, on your summer work quiz, you had to study the words biotic and abiotic. The environment is basically all the biotic, which is living, and the abiotic things around us. It includes everything. And so, like I said, environmental science is going to be studying how we're interacting with it. How the world works, how we affect it, how it affects us, and how we're changing it. So, when we're looking at resources, this is pretty important right here. Everybody knows that things like the sun are renewable, and things like oil are non-renewable. So if I look at renewable resources, like I said, things like sunlight, wind, wave, and geothermal, you know that those things can be made again. There's a little bit more to the definition of renewable and not renewable, though, so I'm getting to that. Then on this side, when we have non-renewable, you know, we're going to be talking about oil, natural gas, and coal. Those are my fossil fuels. And then hard minerals like copper, aluminum, other metals. We're not making any more of these. And then notice in this picture, there's actually something in the middle of this continuum. Things like water, forest products like trees, crops and soils. Those things can actually go either way. So this is not like 4th grade environmental science where the sun makes, the sun's always out, so it's renewable. I mean, that's true, but the ticket is, the key defining feature between a renewable and a non-renewable resource is that a renewable resource, it gets formed faster than the rate of use. So when I talk about trees, when I talk about soil, it can take 500 years to form 1 inch of soil. If we have serious erosion problems because we're doing too much farming in an area, that's not going to be renewable because it's going to get depleted and eroded faster than new soil can be made. So just because the earth can make more doesn't make it renewable. It needs to make it faster than we're using it. We can cut down all the trees faster than they can grow back, then it's no longer renewable. We can pollute the water faster than the earth can actually purify it through the water cycle, then it's no longer renewable. So non-renewable things are formed slower than they're actually, you know, getting used. And so we're going to run out of them. And then, like I said, you have this middle that can sort of go either way, depending on the rate of use. So, again, natural resources. This is ecobabble. You don't get to use this word. You don't get to use the word pollution. They don't mean anything. So if you're talking about a resource, you need to either be talking about a renewable resource or a non-renewable resource and be able to back it up. And so these are what I just told you about, sunlight, wind, wave. Those are perpetually renewed. And some of the things that renew over short periods, they can actually be destroyed. And when they're destroyed, they're then non-renewable. And when we're talking about non-renewable, oil, coal, natural gas, and minerals are always non-renewable, no matter, you know, our rate of usage or not. We're not getting any more of those things. So, it's probably important to put that. The defining feature of renewable, they renew themselves over a short period of time, or they're perpetually renewed. So. So when we talk about ecosystem services, this is every year on the AP exam, one of the FRQs is going to ask you, give an example of ecosystem service. So I guess we have to learn what that is. Ecosystem services, if I'm talking about the ecosystem, I'm talking about the world around us, and a service is something that's provided to you that kind of helps you out, right? So ecosystem services are the things the earth does for us for free. And so the earth purifying our air and water, it does that, and it does that for free. That's an ecosystem service. When bees pollinate our crops so that we can have apples or we can have tomatoes, that's an ecosystem service. The earth does it for us for free. When the earth breaks down our waste with bacteria and returns nutrients like carbon and nitrogen to the carbon and nitrogen cycles, that's done for us for free. That's an ecosystem service. And so when we degrade ecosystems, we remove these ecosystem services because we don't have the bees to pollinate our crops. We don't have the bacteria available because we cleared out everything and put it in a parking lot. We don't have the forest there to help purify the water and help prevent flooding. So those are ecosystem services. You're going to hear that word almost every chapter the whole time. So just good little introduction there. So population growth is a big deal. It's not the most important factor. I think our affluence in each person, how much each person uses, I think that has a lot to do with our problems. But human population is a huge deal. We have 7 billion people on Earth. We're actually over that. 7 billion people happened like Halloween. I'm not even kidding. Like Halloween 2014. So we're at 7.1, 7.2 billion now. And so the reason why we have so many people, first of all, we had the agricultural revolution where we stopped moving around, right? We stopped being hunters and gatherers. We kept seeds and we started keeping livestock. And so we had a stable food supply. And then the Industrial Revolution, that's really where we saw that huge upshoot in population because as we urbanized and had fossil fuels, other technological advances came along like medicines and increased sanitation. And so that helped as well. So here, basically humans or human ancestors have been around for almost 2 million years. So 2 million years, it basically took us, if you look at this little graph, it took us until 1800 to get to a billion. So it took us like 2 million years to get to a billion. Okay? And then it's taken us 200 years to go from 1 billion to 7 billion. That's sort of terrifying to me. And it's because of the Industrial Revolution that we were able to do that. Of course, the agricultural revolution helped, but that a huge increase in growth didn't happen until we started harvesting and using fossil fuels effectively. And so coal with steam engines, this is all a good tie into social studies class, but that's a big deal. So ecological footprint, we looked at that yesterday. And so when you calculate your ecological footprint, you have to remember it's actually the area of land. It's the area of land that people, and water, that people are using to supply their raw resources. So, you know, if you're looking at your actual yard or your house or whatever, that's not going to equal your ecological footprint. You're going to have to look at what land is providing your food, what land is providing your energy. And so rich people in rich countries tend to have larger ecological footprints. And so if everybody lived like us, we saw that we would need 4 Earths or 5 Earths. And we only have 1 Earth, so that's a problem. We are able to live at our current status because of the impoverished people on Earth that are not getting enough food, that have no resources. So they're kind of cushioning that extra that we're using, and that's kind of sad. So if we look at this overshoot, right? This is the global footprint and number of planets. Currently, if you look at the whole Earth, we are using about a planet and a half worth of stuff, which means that we're not going to be able to live like we currently live. We're going to start running out of things like oil and minerals. Okay, so we're overshooting. We're going over what the Earth can actually provide for each of us right now. And if everybody lived like the United States, our global footprint, we would need 4 Earths. Your footprint is in the acres, 20 acres or so. Okay, but for the whole Earth, we would need several Earths, 4 actually, if everybody lived like us. So how can resource consumption and population growth impact global society? There's definitely some case studies where, especially like with Easter Island, they had an island and they only had so many trees, and they used the trees to make canoes, and then they would go out and fish. And once they cut down all the trees, they had huge social conflict, killed everybody, killed each other, and they weren't able to get their food. And so the people of the island, the Rakanui, I think that's a crazy word. It's like, is that really the right word? But they died. And so civilizations, they're going to succeed or fail based on how they use their resources. We can help build a better world. I really like this class because no matter what you want to do when you grow up, it does intersect with this. We're going to talk about social things, politics. We're going to talk about history, and obviously we're going to talk about science. So really this class is good for everybody. I wouldn't recommend everybody take something like AP Biology or AP Chemistry, but this class is for everybody. And so you can see how we're going to talk about things like history, archaeology, with like Easter Island. We're going to talk about politics. I mean, you made a concept map on different sorts of governmental things. And the atmosphere, the oceans, these are all going to be units that we're going to cover. So when we're talking about environmental science, we're looking at how the environment impacts humans and humans impact the environment. There are natural sciences, so these are things like biology and chemistry, and there's social sciences. This is more like sociology, and even something like economics. So we're not just looking at science here, we're looking at social science as well. When we're looking at an environmental problem, this little picture right here is very telling. This is actually a child that has lice, and they were spraying the child in the head to kill the lice with DDT. DDT was banned in the United States in the 70s. And I don't know if you knew this, but you know the bald eagle was endangered and almost went extinct. Did you know that? It's because of DDT. And DDT is an endocrine disruptor. It acts like estrogen in your body, and it made the eagle shells really thin, and so the eagle babies never hatched. And so they didn't reach maturation. They didn't, inside the egg, they couldn't grow to full size. And so we started losing not just eagles, but also falcons and things. Anyway, and that's the same substance they're spraying on this child's head. It kills mosquitoes. It's a pesticide. And so we use it on our crops. And it's still used in developing countries where malaria is a problem. So malaria doesn't have a cure, and its medicines are expensive. And if you don't have food, you probably don't have money for malaria medicine, right? And so in developing countries, they will actually still spray DDT around their area, because to them it is more of a problem to have malaria than to care about their eagles or falcons or whatever, their birds of prey. Okay, so when we look at environmental problems, always want to look at it from both sides, and the cost and benefit analysis, right? What we have other pesticides. We don't have mosquitoes that cause malaria, so we don't really worry about it. Have y'all been watching the news with the Zika thing? You know what I'm talking about, the babies with the little heads? Oh my gosh. So in Brazil, starting in Brazil, there is a mosquito-borne disease, and it causes heads to be too small in children, and it causes them to have learning disabilities and mental retardation. And so if this woman that's pregnant, they get bit by this mosquito that's carrying the Zika virus, and their babies can actually be born with a birth defect, a forever done problem birth defect. And so it's actually 2 cases now found in Florida, some in Texas, I think. Yeah, and I think Puerto Rico has it now. So this is terrifying. And so if you think about that, like as a pregnant person, if we have this disease, would you want to spray DDT and kill the mosquitoes, or worry about the eagles, you know? And so DDT is not safe for pregnant women, but I'm saying when we're looking at a problem, you have to kind of put yourself in that situation, and that's terrifying. So they're not really they're not recommending that pregnant women go into the tropics now. And people that are pregnant in Brazil, like they're having to put bug spray on, like wear gloves and cover up everything. And they're actually in the summer now, right? I mean, it's always hot there, but if you go to the southern hemisphere, they're in the summer now. So they're having to cover up every inch of their bodies, because if they get bit one time, their baby can have a birth defect. So if you're not pregnant, then I think... What is it? I don't know that I haven't seen any, I've read a lot about it, but I haven't seen any other health effects other than the birth effects. Daniel, have you read something?
Well, no, I haven't, but I had a question.
Sure.
If someone was bit by a mosquito and then became pregnant, would they still have a
as a carrier? I don't know. And I think this is something kind of new that they're still looking at. If I know a lot of y'all are on Twitter and like you follow your friends so that you can see what they're eating for lunch. But maybe, now I'm just throwing this out there, I'm not kidding, I'm serious when I say this. When you take the AP exam, these current events, they pull them and use them on FRQs, and I'll try to make you aware of them. But if you'll get on there and you'll follow a couple news sources, and then there's environmental things, like if you're on Twitter, if you look at my page, I follow like the Environmental Defense Fund, the Sierra Club, a couple things like that. Just follow a couple of them. And, you know, not every day, but every other day or so, read a news article, and it'll just make you so much more aware of what's going on. Plus, like, you're a citizen and, like, a person. Like, forget about the AP exam. Like, it's important for you to understand what's going on in the world. So, anyway, Environmental science is not the same thing as environmentalism. Environmentalism is a social movement. So when we talk about political interest groups like PETA, people against or people for the ethical treatment of animals, or something like Greenpeace, or they're really worried about the whales and want to treat everything nicely, that's different than environmental science. That's environmentalism. Environmental science is where you take and you do measurements and you do scientific research and you use that data to support your ideas. Environmentalism is more of a social movement. I'm not saying that environmental scientists can't also be interested in environmentalism. Usually they are because they understand the problems, but they're not the same. So the thing about science is we want to make observations and we want to describe what we're seeing, and we will make hypotheses and test them, and that's something I'm sure you've heard of before. So you're going to make these predictions and you're going to test them, and then you're going to look at the results and reject them or not. There's a couple questions on the test about you're given some data or an experiment, and you have to identify the different kinds of variables. Let me see if those, yeah, they're on here. So I'll go over that in a second. Don't freak out. And we had talked about the variables because we did that with the marginal cost lab. We talked about the manipulative independent variable and the dependent reactive variable with mix and dry. Okay. But anyway, the thing about the scientific method, you know, it's not always so cut and dried. It doesn't always go in this beautiful line, but this is typically how it goes. When we're looking at actual scientists, there are other people that read their research and check it, make sure it's legitimate. And so when you see a peer-reviewed research article that talks about climate change or talks about a new evidence for evolution or something, it's not like this guy just like made some stuff up and published it. There are other scientists that check people's work, and it's a big deal to get published. And so this whole process is very rigid, and it's good. So anyway, if we're looking at a scientific experiment, a variable is something that can get changed. An independent variable is the one that's manipulated, and it goes on the x-axis. And this is something that you're going to determine these values before you start. And what I mean by that is, let me write that down. Before you start your experiment. And so if I go to like the classic example of maybe like putting fertilizer on a plant, right? If I'm going to test 5 plants and I'm going to put 3 grams of fertilizer on this one, 5 grams on this one, 7 grams on this one, you know, I'm going to decide all that before I start. And then I'm going to have that control where I don't put any fertilizer, right? Then I'm going to measure plant growth. The plant growth is going to depend on that fertilizer. And so the one that you actually measure during the experiment, right, you decide the independent beforehand. The one you actually measure during the experiment is the dependent variable because it reacts to the independent variable. Measure during experiment. And like I said, the controlled part of it would be like if you were measuring fertilizer, you would put no treatment on this. You would put no fertilizer. So quantitative data has numbers. Qualitative would be like, that one has prettier flowers. Okay, but it doesn't have a number to it. So that's pretty straightforward. Y'all good on this? I don't want you to miss these 2 questions because you can't identify independent and dependent. Yes, sir?
I would say there's probably a gray area between quantitative and qualitative.
Yeah, but we don't. I mean, you're right. And then when you're doing research, of course, you're probably going to have a little of both. But numbers, I like numbers better, and so that's sort of where we are. A manipulative experiment is going to yield the strongest result. What I just explained to you is a manipulative experiment where you manipulate your independent variable and you test the results with your dependent variable. This is like a standard. The manipulative experiment is your standard science lab, you know. You got this control, you have a control independent variable, and then you can see what happens. You can measure the results. Turns out though, unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know, with environmental science, if we're doing some research on something like climate change, okay, that's a huge deal. I don't have like an earth that I can put in a little box and like not put any carbon dioxide in the air, and then I don't have like another Earth that I could just put like, you know, 200 parts per million, and then I don't have another Earth I can put in this box and do 400 parts per million, and then this other little Earth where I can do 600 parts per million, and then measure it over time. I can't do that. So it's problematic in environmental science if you're looking at problems with the whole ocean. You can't control parts of the ocean and test it, right? If we're worried about health effects of a pesticide like DDT on humans, I can test lab mice, but I can't test a whole human population to see if it's dangerous. That's not okay. It's not ethical. It's not seen as right. So anyway, what we have to use in environmental science, this is what we're typically having to do here in environmental science. We're having to do natural experiments. And so we're going to then use already existing conditions and look at the results then. So this would be something like with climate change. Climate change is mostly caused by the gas CO2 in the atmosphere. And so with a natural experiment, we're going to look at CO2 patterns in the atmosphere over time. And we're going to have to draw our conclusions from that. But we're not going to be able to take the CO2 out and see what happens without it. We're going to have to look back over the data that's already there and make our inferences from that. This is good. We can definitely draw conclusions from natural experiments, but they're not going to be as cut and dried and certain as the manipulative experiments. Yes, ma'am?
What's that word that you read at the start?
Oh, this is environmental science. The natural experiments typically are more environmental science related because we're looking at the whole Earth. Yes, ma'am.
So,
Yes, sir.
so they're not as like clean basically because there's a lot of other unforeseen variables.
Right, and so you can't control anything with these natural experiments. It's really hard to anyway. And so what really happens when you do scientific research, it's not just you come up with a hypothesis and you test it and you call it a day. What really happens, yes, you ask questions, you make a hypothesis, you make predictions, but then over here, after you get your ideas and you get your data, you publish a paper, or you try to publish a paper. You write a paper and it goes to peer review. And that means other scientists that do what you do for a living check your stuff and make sure you're not like making things up. And people do make things up sometimes. Your paper can get rejected and then you can do another experiment, or your paper can get accepted and it gets published in a journal. There's journals for oceanography, there's journals for climate, there's journals for, you know, there's like just on certain kinds of birds. There's like ornithology journals for this kind of bird. So they're really specific, right? And so if it does get published, other scientists in your field will be like, hey, that's cool. Maybe I'll do an experiment similar and see if I get the same results. So when we say that something is based on scientific research, that's it's a pretty rigorous thing. So moving on, sustainability. People don't know what sustainability means, actually, like the definition, and so they'll just be like, we need to live more sustainably, but they don't know the definition of sustainability. And so this is something you have to know to be able to apply. And so, I don't know what it says up there, I don't care. The definition of sustainability is that your children and their children and their children can live the same way you're living, and we won't run out of stuff. You can see how that's not really happening, right? So anyway, the idea that we must live within our planet's means that the Earth and its resources can sustain us for life in the future. So, like I said, if we're living sustainably, generation after generation after generation can continue on with the same quality of life that we have. We're not going to run out of stuff. So, that really involves conserving things, developing long-term solutions, and keeping fully functioning ecosystems. Otherwise, things will fall apart. Population growth, it makes all of these problems worse. We add 200,000 people every day to the planet, 200,000 more people. And most of these people are born in developing countries, the countries that actually can't support them. So that's very interesting. Our life has become more pleasant, but as our lives become more pleasant, we use more things to make it more pleasant. Not everybody benefits equally. Like I said, if everybody on Earth lived like America, like Americans, we would need 4 Earths. We can live the way we live because we're doing it at the expense of other people in poverty. So in the United States, this is very interesting. You've heard of like the 1%, and there's people like rioting for it. Well, the richest 1% of people in the United States have 25% of the income. And so I posted something on Twitter the other day, actually. It was that the richest 63 people in the world have as much wealth as the lowest 3.5 billion people in the world. They have as much money. 63 people have as much money as 3.5 billion people. So that's more interesting to me than what your friends ate for lunch. Or this is me. So use your social media to also broaden your horizons. This picture's on your test. This is your ecological footprint. Notice it has an HA there. The HA means hectare, and that's 2.47 acres. So it's just a unit of area. But anyway, if we look and make comparisons to the world average, our ecological footprint is 7.2. The world average is 2.7. So we're twice, or over twice, almost 2.5 times the average on Earth if we do the math, if we divided it out. If you look at something like Mexico, we're over twice as much. Something like Afghanistan, we're 14 times as much because they have an ecological footprint of 0.5 hectares and we are at 7.2. So if I think about $7 and I think about 50 cents, then that comes out to be 14 times as much. Yes, Daniel?
What is the advantage to using hectares as opposed to acres?
That's just what they use. Alright, so next. The lives we live today are due to fossil fuels. Fossil fuels make our machines. Most of our fertilizers, your perfume is made out of oil. Do you know that? Stop using perfume. It's taken petroleum and they rearrange the molecules a little bit so that your nose picks it up as a flower, but it's really just petroleum. So transportation, consumer products, plastic is made of oil. People don't know that, and I find that interesting. So here you go. There you go. First period, I explained that the bubbles in boiling water are actually made out of water, and I'm just explaining to you today that plastic is made out of oil. So I'm doing I need a race. So anyway, sustainable solutions. You know, we have renewable energy sources like wind. We're killing it in wind, especially out in the West. Texas is just putting up wind turbines everywhere. We have more organic agriculture. There's legislation. We just finally made an agreement to cut down on our CO2 emissions for climate change. So, you know, recycling is available, except at Woodland because they won't come pick up the trash. I don't know. I'm really trying, like, they won't come. So decreasing greenhouse gas emissions. And the greenhouse gases are the gases that cause climate change that make the world hotter. Okay, so we'll have a whole unit on that. Okay, so this is the end of chapter 1. So good for us. The term environment does not include, so if I look at these, animals and plants, oceans and rivers, structures and urban centers, and all of the above. So what did you get on this one, please? Abby? What? D. Yeah, so sure. It's always all of the above. Which of the following statements about the term environmental science is correct? It is a social movement. It studies how the natural world works. It does not involve, or it does not include human activities. It is a declining science. What did you get on that one, Jameson?
B.
Yeah, so it's definitely the study of how the world works and how we interact with it. If you had various amounts of fertilizers to plants in a laboratory, I didn't actually mean to do this on purpose when I was giving you my example. I'm sorry. Sorry, Abby, I picked you again. What'd you get? So, let's see, the fertilizer. Yeah, that would be your independent variable. And then the growth of each plant would be your dependent variable. And then the plant that had no fertilizer would be your control. And this is an example of a manipulative experiment. Okay, so you feeling okay with all those words I just said? Okay. The kids that have me in chemistry right now are like, yeah. All right, so the push for sustainable solutions on university colleges, campuses is important because I think we already know the answer, don't we? It's D. It doesn't. Is it really D? Okay. Oh, and I actually took this out of the PowerPoint. So this one, when I left yesterday, like my computer, both of my computers are really quirky, and I took this one out, but it didn't. Yours doesn't have this, does it? It does. Well, the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment just basically said we're all going to die. The life is, we're doing awful. It's probably C, I'm guessing. And do you think it's ethical? Do you know what ethics means? Do you know what the word ethical actually means? It means, is it okay? Ethics is a study of right and wrong. So, do you have this question? Okay, cool. Let's talk about it. So, do you think it's okay or ethical for the United States to have the largest ecological footprint in the world? What did you put down, Kara? C? So definitely not. People do not say to reduce their footprint, which is easy to say on paper, right? But then it's hard to actually do. According to the graph, what is responsible for the population growth over the last 500 years? Definitely the black pig. I think that's the answer. Christian, what'd you get? Actually, this is really interesting. I like to be the actually guy. There's the thing. There's an actually guy. I don't want to be the actually guy. But the more education a woman has, the less children she has. Okay? Think about all the people you know that have like 8 kids. Do you know any people like that? I know some people like that too. Okay. How many college degrees do they have? Okay. Think about somebody that has no kids or 1 kid. How many college degrees do they have? The more educated a woman is, the less children she has. And that's like, I'm not just being ugly to people with a bunch of kids. I don't care. That's fine. Have all the kids you want. But, actually don't, because we live in America and our ecological footprints are off the chain. But, so, the more educated a woman becomes, the more access she has to birth control and the right to say, I don't think I want to do this again. It's actually not education. That makes the population shrink. So, and that's a whole unit, and that's my favorite unit. So do you want to give it a try, Chelsea? What did you say? Think it's B? Okay, so it's actually fossil fuels. Because fossil fuels, over the last 500 years, they have made us have more food. But they've also made us have increased sanitation. Things like plastic, you think about all the medical necessities that are made out of plastic. And then the availability of electricity to refrigerate our food that we do make. I mean, we have more food, but then also just the sanitation and quality of life that comes with fossil fuels is tremendous. So, pretty interesting. And then, what happens if if test results cannot reject the hypothesis? Then the hypothesis was supported. Is that what you got on C? Sure. Okay. So I'm gonna, every time I finish a little PowerPoint chapter, like I just take like 2 minutes and just chill out for a second. So 2 minute chill time. Yay. Okay, so chapter 2, when I printed it said all the slides were chapter 1, so I was just like, whatever. And I just went over it with the black, so I gave up. Anyway, this is more like scientific background stuff. This is the quiz you just took, like, whatever day it was, a couple days ago. So it does have this case study of this really powerful earthquake that happened off the coast of Japan. We're going to talk about plate tectonics and stuff. A lot of chapter 2 was plate tectonics and geology. We're going to hit that, but it'll be like in a month, okay? Because I like to do a whole unit on plate tectonics and mining because it all kind of ties in together. I think that's a little bit more appropriate. So anyway, it knocked the power out, and it made a lot of countries question the safety of nuclear power. And they used this as the case study for this chapter because it dealt with atoms and energy and that kind of stuff. So anyway, huge tsunami. Lots of people killed, and the environmental thing that came out of this was there was a nuclear power plant that lost power to its reactors, and so we'll certainly go back to that. Fukushima is the name of it. Have y'all heard of that? Okay, good. Yay! That's great. So matter, I refuse to read you what matter is and the conservation of matter. I'm just kidding. It's everything. Okay, it's fine. Okay. Radioactive isotopes and half-lives. This is all great and everything, but it's really not. Nope. Molecules and compounds. There you go. That's nice. Nope. I'm going to talk about hydrogen bonds and water. This is so. Yay! Chemistry. So water looks like Mickey Mouse. It's a Mickey Mouse podcast. Outside, it's fun inside. Did you know Mickey Mouse? Did you know water looked like Mickey Mouse? Did you know that? 3 people shakes their head. Okay. So this oxygen side, this is this. It is a little bit negative, and the ears, the hydrogens are a little bit positive. There's a lot more to that, but we're not in AP chemistry, so I'm a holiday. Anyway, water doesn't, notice there's not like, these atoms aren't in a true bond with each other. It's not like they're stuck together like these atoms are. They're not bonded like that. But this sign is a little bit negative, and the hydrogens are a little bit positive, and so you have this electrostatic attraction, or these opposite charges are like little magnets, and that makes the water sort of stick together. And so when you do a belly flop in the pool, it's because Mickey Mouse's chin is stuck to Mickey Mouse's ear and it don't want to come apart, and so it hurts your belly. Like, that's honestly how that works. This is also when you try to make spaghetti. You know, you can brown that meat and get that sauce cooking for that water in the bowl. This is because the water is stuck together in these hydrogen bonds, and they don't want to separate, because if you think about going from a liquid to a gas, you're going to have to break each of these little magnetic attractions between the water molecules. And so, because if the water becomes a gas and it starts floating around the room, they can't be stuck together anymore, like little magnets, you see. So, anyway, like I said in chemistry last period, 0 people could answer me. I was like, what are the bubbles in water? When you're boiling, the bubbles are actually water vapor. They're gaseous water that comes out. That's why when water boils and you let it go for a while, it disappears. Those bubbles are water in gas form. Are y'all with me? I was just like, somebody was like, it's the oxygen. And we had just talked about chemical and physical changes. And I was like, well, then I was trying to lead them down the path. I was like, well, are there hydrogen bubbles too? Yeah. And I was like, is this a physical or chemical change? It's a physical change. So if I make oxygen and hydrogen bubbles, is that making a new substance? Yes, ma'am. Oh. So if you missed that in chemistry, there you go. Anyway, this hydrogen bond, this is why if you live in California, if you live in San Francisco, even though they're at like similar latitudes in us, right now it's like 68 degrees and it just stays 68 degrees all year long. It's really hard to heat and cool water because of all these little hydrogen bonds. And so they don't want to move apart to make gas, and it's hard to freeze water because they're just stuck in these little hydrogen bonds, okay? And so that's very important. And so cohesion is water sticking to itself. Water also sticks to other things. That's called adhesion. Not as important. And so water absorbs heat and only changes a small temperature, only has a small temperature change. That's going to stabilize climate. It's the reason that you're not on fire right now. If I took some sugar, do you realize that you're doing cellular respiration right now? And that means that glucose is getting combined with oxygen and making carbon dioxide and water vapor. If I took some sugar and I put it on the table, I could light it on fire, and it's pretty impressive. I mean, water is very flammable. That's why right now, you're not room temperature, because these bonds are getting broken. But you are made of 70% water, so that's why you're only like 98 degrees instead of like 300 degrees. You ever thought about that? Okay. I find this all very interesting. I'm a little bit of a nerd. So anyway, hydrogen bonds for the win. Same reason you're not on fire is the same reason it sucks to make spaghetti. So water, when it freezes, into ice, it actually forms like a more cubic, expanded out crystal, and so that's why water will float, or excuse me, ice will float on water, because it takes up more space, and so its density is lower than the liquid water. Oh, this is the thing right here. This is on my test. This is on the AP exam. This is the thing. When I'm looking at pH, okay. When I'm looking at pH, for the love of all things holy, let's get it straight first. That 7 is neutral. Below 7 is an acid, above 7 is a base. If you don't know that, then you're about to have some trouble. That should be like basic background knowledge. That's not funny. Okay. A job security for me. Couple things. Normal rain. They don't use this. This is everywhere. They use this to trick you. Normal rainwater has a pH of around 5.6. Normal rainwater. Normal rainwater is acidic. And you know why? It's because carbon dioxide in the air combines with water and makes carbonic acid. And so normal rainwater is acidic. You got that? So it has a pH less than 5. Less than 7, sorry. Around 5.5, 5.6. Acid rain is below 4, is usually, you know. Lemon juice is around 2. Car battery acid is around 0.5. And you can actually have a pH less than 0 because it's on an exponential logarithmic scale. That's fun. Take chemistry with me and I'll explain more. Anyway, 14 is as high as you get on this basic scale. It can actually be above 14, but, you know, let's just go with it. Soap is basic. Seawater is basic. So those are some things with that. Now, these numbers, when I say something has a pH, when I say something has a pH of 3, that's actually measuring hydrogen ions. These are hydrogen ions are the things in acids that eat metals. This is the scary part of an acid. And it's actually 10 to the negative third. A pH is a pH of 3. Did you take chemistry already? Did you do something sort of like this? And then if you didn't, it's fine. If I have a pH of 5, though, it's actually 10 to the negative fifth. So, when I go from a pH of 5 to a pH of 3, I'm getting more acidic. Can you follow me there? In just your head. Now follow me mathematically. I'm not going to be 2 units more acidic or twice as acidic or anything like that. It's actually going to be, when I go from 10 to the negative fourth, that's the power of 10. 10 to the negative third, that's another power of 10. Going from a pH of 5 to 3 is actually 100 times more acidic. Because these numbers, when I take pH, they're numbers on top of a 10. Okay? They're going to try to trick you with that. So let's look at some examples. Let me do some with you. So if I go from a pH of, 13 to 8, I'm not 5 times more acidic. I'm 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 times 10. So 10 to 12, 13 to 12 is 10. Then that's 100 from 12 to 11. 10 more is 1,000. 10 more is 10,000. And 10 more is 100,000. So going from a pH of 13 to 8 is 100,000 times more acidic. Follow my logic there? And so if I go the other way, if I go from a pH of 5 to 7, that's going to be 100 times more basic. If you go this way, it becomes more basic. And that's the quickest pH lesson I can give you today. That's 3 solid weeks in AP chemistry. 3 really awful weeks. So anyway, there's your little numbers. And like I said, it's logarithmic. So a substance with a pH of 6 is 10 times more acidic or has 10 times as many hydrogens as something with a pH of 7. I've spent a lot of time on that because it's important. All right, organic compounds contain carbon, and they're joined together. Usually they're joined together with hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen. I don't know why it said say, oh, there it is, hydrogen. That's kind of the big one. And so if we look at what these actually look like, when we're talking about organic compounds in this class, they usually are made of oil. This right here is methane. So this right here, that's what you are using when you cook on your stove and the blue fire comes out. That's methane. It's a hydrocarbon. This right here is ethane. It's another fuel, and it's a hydrocarbon. Do you know why it's called a hydrocarbon? It's because it has carbon and hydrogen. And then this is naphthalene. Isn't that fun? And so when I look at these are all components of oil. And so these are the same things that you can rearrange and make plastic out of. That you can make like fleece. Does anybody have that fleece that you like buy from Old Navy? Does anybody have? You have one. This is made of oil. I'll show you. This is actually basically this kind of fleece is made of oil. Polyester pants, like dress slacks. Do you have some dress slacks that like are kind of like stiff and they repel water? That's made of oil, and so you can actually rearrange oil and get these polymers, these long repeating chains that do some cool things. But yeah, so that's what we need to know about organic chemistry in this class. There's a couple different macromolecules that your body's made out of: proteins, nucleic acids, and carbohydrates. Lipids are also, those are fats. Those are also essential, but they're not polymers. This is more biology. This is not a huge deal. Proteins, though, I think you all know that they're made of amino acids. Is that ringing a bell to you? Yay, biology. And so they are what you're made of, whatever. Sorry, I have like a very good understanding of what exactly goes on this AP exam and my test, and so if it's not on there a lot, I ain't going to talk about it a lot. Nucleic acids can either be DNA or RNA. That's where you get your genes, and your genes are the little codes that tell your body what protein to make. Good biology, right? So, see how long I'm spending on this? Yeah, it's because it's not on your test. So, anyway, carbohydrates, they have oxygen, carbon, and hydrogen. They give us energy. Glucose is an example. And there's a couple different kinds of energy. We have potential energy, kinetic energy, and chemical energy. And most of the time, and I don't like that your book separates this, most chemical energy is potential energy. So when we talk about something like glucose and how, if you think about it, if you have like a sandwich in your book bag, it has the potential to help you like run around and stuff. And that energy is stored in the bonds of those glucose and proteins and all that of your sandwich. And so, to me, that chemical energy is potential energy, and a lot of science books will classify it as such, but there you go. Kinetic energy is movement, and yeah. So, potential energy in your food. Notice here I have the chemical equation for respiration, which is glucose and oxygen gives me carbon dioxide and water. And notice here, as this happens, it gets off a lot of heat, and thank God for the hydrogen bonds in water. You're not as hot as really you should be, because it is absorbing a lot of that heat without actually changing temperature. So anyway, that's respiration, and it takes potential energy and can convert it to kinetic energy. The laws of thermodynamics. This is super important. The first law of thermodynamics is going to be the first thing that comes to your head. When you think about energy, and like you probably learned some laws, you're like, what is that first law? And it takes you a second, but you know, you can come up with it, right? So it's like, oh, energy can change forms, but it can't be created or destroyed. Have you heard that before in your life? So the first law of thermodynamics is the first one that comes to your head. And on the AP exam, they're going to expect you to know them both, but to know which one's which. And so the first one that comes to you is the first law. The second one takes you a second to think about. Okay? So the second law of thermodynamics says that energy goes from awesome to crap. That's not exactly it, but it says that energy goes from useful and concentrated to less useful and less concentrated. And stuff being less useful and less concentrated, the word for that crap and that disorganization is called entropy. And so, anyway, and it gets a letter S. So, the second law of thermodynamics says that energy changes from a more ordered state. So notice I have logs here. They're nice and ordered, have good little bonds between their atoms, and the energy is stored, very structured in those chemical bonds. When it goes through this combustion here, this burning, that's going to be released as light and heat. And then I'm going to have ashes. I'm no longer going to have my energy stored in bonds. It's going to be floating around the universe, literally around the universe, as heat, but not as something that I can use again. Let's just think about this. If I eat a cheeseburger, I can't somehow put a little bubble around myself and trap my body heat and use it again. I can't do that because that energy went from awesome and useful, stored in the nice little chemical bonds, and then it released as body heat. And you can't do anything with that. And so here's the thing. This is how it applies to this whole class. When we look at fossil fuels, oil, coal, and natural gas, those are really compact and super highly concentrated in energy. And so we can burn them and do stuff. When we try to trap solar energy, it's spread out and it's heat and crappy, right? When we try to take that and go backwards into something useful. So when we use renewable energy, we're usually trying to go against the second law of thermodynamics. Fossil fuels goes with the laws. Put your phone up. Fossil fuels go with the laws of thermodynamics. So that's why we like oil, coal, and natural gas. Not because we're jerk faces, but because they go with the laws of thermodynamics. Everything else, when we're trying to take energy from water or energy from wind, that's really spread out. When we're trying to make electricity so we can curl our hair and toast our bread, that's not, it's going the backwards, you see? So, that's just something to think about. Are y'all okay with these two? Energy cannot be created or destroyed, but goes from one form to another. Energy goes from awesome to crappy, and usually it's lost as heat. Yes, sir?
I was wondering, is technically there potential energy in everything according to like quantum theory?
Yes, and if we were in quantum mechanics, we could talk about it. So anyway, that's some deep stuff. The sun releases radiation from the electromagnetic spectrum, and so that's light. It's light, and that's what photosynthesis comes off of. So autotrophs, if you need to know that there's like 3 words for the same thing. An autotroph makes its own food, okay, and it does primary production. So, and that's usually a plant or algae. So when you think about a plant or algae, it's also a primary producer, and it's also an autotroph. Okay, so they make their own food from photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is turning the sun's diffuse light energy into concentrated chemical energy. So photosynthesis goes against the second law of thermodynamics. And the reason that can work is because we're constantly putting in energy from the sun. As soon as the sun goes out, photosynthesis stops because it constantly has to have this income energy because it's going backwards from what the Earth would like to do, or the universe would like to do, which is to burn all this energy off and turn it into heat. So chloroplast is where this happens. There's the chemical reaction for photosynthesis. Of course, it makes sugar and it makes oxygen, and that's why we like plants, because they make our food and our oxygen. Well, they do it for photosynthesis. Heterotrophs is a word that means that you actually have to eat other things. They're also called consumers. And so if plants are producers, heterotrophs, or we're usually talking about animals or fungi or something like that, they are consumers, and so they're heterotrophs. And notice that respiration, and remember plants do respiration too, yes? Plants and animals and bacteria, anything that's alive does respiration. But it's the same chemical formula for photosynthesis, but it's backwards. And the test has these formulas, and it has a formula for chemosynthesis as well, which I'm going to get to very soon. So, there's that. We never finished our little circle thing, did we?
No.
Okay, we'll do that. How much did you, let's finish up through chemosynthesis, and we can actually do that this last couple minutes. That'll be good. So anyway, geothermal energy is coming from volcanoes deep within the, or heat deep within the earth. And so this is, when we talk about deep sea vents, hydrothermal vents, this is what they look like. We have all these tube worms, and these are all this life. There's these giant, crazy looking crabs and stuff. These weird little shrimp with no eyeballs. This is a really interesting ecosystem. Nobody needs eyes because it's super dark down there because it's a mile or 2 deep. It's pretty cool. Anyway, they're all feeding off these bacteria that are taking the hydrogen sulfide gas from the this hot volcanic offshoot stuff here, this volcanic gas, and they're turning it into sugar. And so chemosynthesis, when I look at its chemical formula, it's a little bit different. So if I look at it, they can take CO2, which is the same as photosynthesis. Photosynthesis takes up CO2. Got water there, and there's my hydrogen sulfide gas. This has chemical energy stored within it, and then they can take and make sugar, glucose, and this is actually sulfuric acid. So notice here that no oxygen is made. It doesn't make oxygen, it makes sulfuric acid. If you look, the oxygen that would have been made gets with this hydrogen and sulfur. See it? So there's where the oxygen goes. It binds into that acid, which is kind of crazy and terrifying. But there's a whole little community of life under the ocean that thrives on this. Every ocean is made by this vent, and we'll talk about plate tectonics, but this is all over the world, and in some geologically active places like Yellowstone, they have it as well. So there's that. So let me finish up these questions with you. I'll just do them real quick, and we'll look at our chart. So which of the following is not a reason water is essential for life? Is there a D? No, I'm just kidding. So not a reason. Oh, it's D. D is the answer. So water can definitely dissolve other stuff. So that's good. It helps you to say, it helps you rid of your body of your own waste. I mean, it's very interesting. So which of the following is not a carbohydrate? So definitely DNA is not a carbohydrate. It's a nucleic acid. According to the first law of thermodynamics, energy cannot be created or destroyed. So that's A. Remember, B would be the second law. Disorder. Okay. Heterotroph means you eat other things. So that's going to be a deep sea tube worm. Worms don't do photosynthesis. What is the most basic thing here? So it's the thing closest to 14, and so that's going to be probably soap. Yep.
Wait, I thought you said tube worms were chemosynthesis.
It's the bacteria that do chemosynthesis. Bacteria do it. The tube worms feed off of it. Get your little circle paper out, and we'll finish that up real quick.
Oh, this one?
Yes.
Okay, so 7 to 14 is basically from 7 to 0 like that.
And 7 is neutral. 7 is neither. And I'll turn the video off. I think we're good here.
Probably. I'll just